Good morning and welcome to today's e-learning series for service-oriented IT. Today we'll be focusing on change and release management. This is session 10. We have one more session left in this series and then we'll be moving on to other topics of interest to our audience. Our e-learning format, as always, is a panelist discussion on key considerations related to today's topic, which again I mentioned is change and release management. Really, we'll be focusing on a discussion around minimizing the impact of changes to services and making sure that we're keeping customers happy at the end of the day. That is really our focus. So let's introduce our panelists. Pierre.
Sure. My name is Pierre Paquette. I'm the CTO here at Rappa Technologies. My background is technology and working with customers to get the most out of the tools they've got. Over the last 10, 15 years, it has been in the ITAM and ITSM space, working on all aspects, again, in that area, from loading data, deploying tools, to working out requirements, from managing their IT infrastructure all the way to costing things out in terms of how it relates back to finance.
Right. My name is Susan Odell. I'm CEO at Rappa, and my role is really focusing on the business objectives of our organization and also keeping our consulting services focused on the business goals that our customers are trying to achieve. My background, more than 20 years of experience in enterprise software and services, focusing on measurable improvement, whether that's in our internal operations or operations within our customer organizations. The background is quite broad across service management, asset management, system management, document management, and learning management systems, and continuing my education in terms of best practice in IT service management. Richard?
Yes, my name is Richard Lavac. I'm the IT Management Knowledge Director at Rappa. So my background has been really in process improvement and requirements management. 25 years, as I said, of system consulting. The last 15 or so really focusing on best practices from an IT perspective. So implementation of ITIL and ISO IEC 20000. So my focus obviously is a lot more on process, which makes our team, very good to work together, with Susan's focus on business and Pierre's focus on tool. I bring in the process side, and together we really have the three-legged stool that a lot of people talk about.
Right. So before we get started on today's content, I encourage you to visit our website, resources and videos. We've recorded all of these sessions as well. There are many other learning opportunities for you on the site. We have driven at the highest level from the business value of service-oriented IT, and then broken down, what does that mean? What are the components of that? So I won't go through each one, but as you can see, there's a flow to things today, focusing on change and release management. So without further ado, Richard, if you could kick off with some definitions for us.
Okay, so these definitions are, inspired by obviously ITIL and ISO 20000, but it's just to set the tone on what we're talking about, because there's a lot of confusion. Change management is a term that is used for so many things in organizations. There's a lot of confusion around it. From purely an IT, service management perspective, change management is about minimizing the impact of changes on service quality. So it's about, taking an approach for planning, authorizing, and overseeing the implementation of changes to the services and supporting infrastructure in a way that allows you to understand the risks. Obviously there's always risk when you change things, but change management is about taking control of that risk and understanding it. So it's all the business practice around that. Release management is the business practice of introducing really those changes to the services. So it's about the approach that you're taking to build the changes, test them, and release them in the live infrastructure. In some instances, release management contains deployment itself. In other instances, release management is its own thing, and deployment is a separate process. Even if you look at ITIL version 2 as compared to ITIL version 3, you'll see that in one case, release contains everything, and the other, they've actually separated out deployment. So it's more a question of language and definitions, but in the end, release management is about making sure you introduce change well into the services.
Yeah, and go ahead, Sue.
No, you go ahead. Here.
No, I was just going to say, just like in all the other sessions, when I tend to pipe in, it's always around the more technical side of things. And, a lot of times IT organizations, when they start thinking of change management, release management, the technical people think of the technical aspects of these two processes and often stop there. They stop short in including the other areas of business within IT, looking at things as a service. So it's important that the change management and release processes do look at the technical side, because IT is technical, but it also needs to take into account all the other stakeholders that are participating, either as providers of information or as consumers of information that is collected during these two processes.
Yeah, the thing I was going to mention or just wanted to talk about, again, it fits in with my business thinking. When in our experience, we know that many organizations are not mature in change management, the formalization of change and release management. So just wanted to kind of get your feedback, Richard, in terms of helping customers understand where this fits in terms of the maturity roadmap of IT service management. We know most organizations are pretty good at incident management. This is kind of so can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, yeah, I mean, although a lot of organizations do, forms of change management, usually, as Pierre was mentioning, it's very often very technical focused, and it's really about just coordinating the introduction of change. So it's managing a change schedule, and that's usually what you see in a mature organization. They have something they call change management, but in the end, all it is managing when changes are introduced into a production. There's no review of changes. There's no formal impact assessment of change. That said, though, change management is a practice that is fairly easy to introduce if you have the appropriate governance around it, and it actually makes a big impact on the maturity of an organization. You can take a fairly immature IT organization, and simply by introducing change management and release, because you need it in there, you make a big leap in maturity. All of a sudden, the IT organization looks like it knows what it's doing, because it understands the changes it's introducing. It understands the impact. So yeah, a lot of organizations are not there because they don't really understand it, but if they make the effort, it makes a big difference.
That's terrific.
I would even go as far as saying that, of all the processes, I think change management is a key process, just because, without it, how can you rely on any of the information that all the other processes are using? So, if your change management process, if it's broken, how can you rely on anything else, realistically? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so I'll move on to the next slide. Here you go.
Okay, so this slide was just about showing really how change management and release are at the heart of all the other processes around them. I mean, obviously, you can implement incident management and service request management up front and deal with that. But in the end, these things will result in changes, and if those changes aren't managed, then you're out of control. Even if you do have incident and service request up front, if you're not dealing with how you're introducing those changes and controlling them, in the end, it won't work. So, whether changes come from incident, service requests, problems, projects is our major introducers, if that's a word, of changes into the infrastructure. And sometimes we forget that. Sometimes projects are on a separate path that have nothing to do with change management, but we can't do that. It should all go through change. And then obviously from change, is understanding how it affects our configuration and asset information. If you don't do change management, how can you keep config and asset up to date? And obviously, changes really changes are part of a release, and release is what introduces those modifications into the infrastructure. But we need to understand that not all changes have to go through a formal release. Some changes may be introduced directly. That's why there's the two arrows, one going from release into the infrastructure and one going from change into the service infrastructure. So that's those are key points. But at the heart of all of this discussion is that change and release management are just essential to keeping things under control.
So this slide is really, I think it says a lot, and it to me brings up the importance of planning, of strategy. That it's not just about implementing or saying I'm going to implement change management, I'm going to get that going. Well, what does it mean in this context, and how are we going to link it to these other practices that you've put around change management? So context, right? So for one organization, how you go about implementing change will look different than it is for another, depending on people that you have available, the maturity of your processes, and how much you can actually take on. So that sort of contemplation of how you go about it is really critical in terms of how you're going to be successful in the end.
Yeah, and to that point too, it's the governance around it that is fundamental. I mean, a change management process with no governance support behind it is of no value. Mm-hmm. Change management has to be in a position, like the organization that handles change management has to be in a position to stop a change if they believe it's not ready. And that requires a lot of clout in an organization. And for that, there has to be the right governance there. And I've seen that very often where organizations put in a change management process, but they don't give it any authority. So, change management becomes just a rubber stamp that you have to go through, but in the end, they can never reject anything.
Right. So roles and responsibilities as well, that's key. We're working on a project right now, Pierre, right, where we've identified the role of the CIO. At the end of the day, there's that, executive authority, executive final decision and support in order for a manager who has the authority to stop a release, gets the support of the executive to make those decisions. So it's very key.
And to bring it up to Richard's point, up to governance, because what we're also seeing is that there are multiple change management processes often within an organization, within the various silos, and if they're all doing things their own way, there's no consistency, there's no repeatability, and there's no governance, and that really is then a major gap in terms of relying on the information again that you need to manage your IT, from a holistic point of view.
Yeah. Great discussion as always.
Okay, so this slide was, just to provide an understanding of the life cycle of a change versus a release, because although it seems pretty simple, it causes a lot of confusion. And so, in this line on the the first line, you see actually multiple changes. That's why that line is kind of doubled up. But the change life cycle, a change goes to being approved. Then there's a building part. Then there's an authorization for implementation, meaning we approved that you build the change and go ahead and do it. But then we authorize it for implementation. At that point, we say, yes, the change was built according to what we approved. Now you can go and implement it, and then the change is completed. Throughout that life cycle, if the change or changes are actually part of a release, then there's a link to the release life cycle, where once a change is approved, you basically start building the new release with those changes. So the release life cycle starts at new. Assigned meaning that it's assigned to to a group to do. And then once you do the change building, that's where the release is being built to. Changes is building the individual changes to whether a piece of software or hardware that end up affecting a service. Release building is actually building all of these pieces together so that they can be released together. Then there's a testing part, and once tested, then it goes up for authorization for implementation. and deployed. So the two are really, really closely linked. It's not like, we do the change lifecycle and then we do separately the release lifecycle. They have to work together. So, and one of the key points to come out of there is that you can bring a lot of changes into one release. And the other key point is that releases should not be done haphazardly. In better organizations, the schedule of releases is predefined ahead of time. You know exactly when major releases will occur, minor releases will occur. Your clients know, so they can plan. So if you say our release is in December, our major release, then they know that in December there will be a change to the service or an interruption in the service. If you start doing it haphazardly, your clients are never know when to, if they can plan on the availability of the service.
Yeah, it really does show the importance of planning, and like you said, Richard, the planning needs to be consistent and will often, depend on the environment, or the clients that they deal with, and they can have, predefined as well as those minor releases, or maybe they have releases that will address issues on a reactive point of view. However, being proactive and being consistent leads towards customers, like you said, knowing what they're getting and being able to rely on the services, which then ties back to their satisfaction level as well in terms of the services IT is providing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously emergency releases exist, but, you've seen it, and I'm sure Sue's seen it too. Some organizations, basically all they do are emergency releases. They don't have planned releases. They just haphazardly release stuff as they go because everything's an emergency. And that's just not a way to work long term.
Yeah, they're very reactive, which tends to be, in a lot of the projects we've been involved with, the norm these days. Yeah.
So I just want to bring it up a level again, and just as you were going through this, it just, the thought of what drives change, right? I think traditionally in IT, people think of technology, and we talk about this all the time, that the shift to the whole reason for this webinar e-learning series that we're doing is to help organizations better understand the shift to service-oriented IT. And that impacts change and release management as well, right? So if we talk about, and I know one of our takeaways that you're going to go through, Richard, is the business relationship manager, but I just want to talk about that now. That layer of discussing customer needs, right? What is a business trying to accomplish? That's not a discussion about tools and technology and change related to versioning, versioning control and new releases or transition to new technologies. Change may be business driven, and then other change may be more technical, making sure that you're up to the right version so that you're meeting security requirements and that you're not exposing breaches in infrastructure, those types of things. So can we talk about that for a minute in terms of the things that drive change? Release, as your graphic illustrates, happens as a part of the change cycle, but can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I mean, really there are two, major sources of change, if we will. There's the business requirements, the business need that drive change either through, projects or requests made to, the business relationship manager and things like that. So business needs, that's certainly a big area of change. The other, obviously, is technology driven, and that could be internal to IT, that we want to make things better, that we want to optimize, that, or it could be externally driven, as software is going out of support, they're upgrading, a piece of hardware, and we have to make changes in our infrastructure. Those are usually like the two major areas where change are, come out. Usually IT has focused mostly on the technology side, but the business side is really essential. Now, if we look at, best practice like ITIL will talk about even having the business sitting on the change advisory board. Personally, I don't think it's a great idea because, the business is not asking for a change, the business should have a business requirement, and we should decide IT if it requires a change or not. I think change management is really more of an internal process to IT. But that being said, the business requirements need to be represented there in the change process, in the change lifecycle. But yeah, IT has not been very good in the past at understanding the source of change. They always kind of dealt with, we have this change, now we need to do something with it. And so yeah, the business is an important source of those.
That also then reflects, what we've been saying in all these sessions is that IT needs to transition between being a provider of technology to a provider of services. And the fact that they're struggling to do that, we're seeing, the repercussions as business wants to get more involved in areas where they maybe shouldn't, and be, that level of abstraction is shifting down where it maybe it shouldn't. So there is that transition that needs to happen, and to start thinking as a service and services in terms of what IT can deliver.
Excellent.
Definitely.
Yeah. So there's just an important point I wanted to raise as well. We've got to, as an industry, this is happening. We haven't crossed the chasm where service-oriented IT is the mainstream for everybody, but we can't lose sight of that. And as you said, Richard, it's not about the business being incorporated into the change advisory board, but where does the business sit in how you manage change? How are you building that feedback loop from the business into change management? What we're seeing with some of our clients is that they have service owners, or if they call their services products, they have product managers, and their role is to think about the customer from a product point of view within IT, and then how does that fit within change? So again, I'm repeating myself, but it is definitely an important way to think about how you link the business into your change and release management processes.
And the change management process really should be about understanding the impact of what IT does to services, and be able to say, no, we can't do this because the impact on the service is too great. And that's where change management comes into play. And that's where a lot of organizations have difficulty, because they rarely will an IT organization want to say, no, we're not doing this because we feel the impact on the service is too great, because we look at it from a technology perspective. A guy comes in and he says, well, we have to go to Windows 10 this month because it's Windows 7 is going out of support. From a technology perspective, maybe, but change manager should look at it from a business perspective. What does it mean to our business to change every workstation they have from Windows 7 to Windows 10? What will be the impact on the business? Is the timing right? Is it end of fiscal year? Or all of these effects that need to be taken into account. Whereas if we look at it from a purely an IT perspective, yeah, it's a no-brainer. We have to because it's out of support.
Right. Okay, so we'll move on to our takeaways. And Richard, please.
Okay, so one of the points, and Pierre has talked about it in the previous slides, but one of the essential things that change management does is ensuring that we keep our IT information up to date and accurate. If we don't have a change process that tracks the changes that are occurring, it's impossible to have an IT asset management repository that is up to date, nor a configuration management database. The information becomes bad because changes are happening all over the place and no one is documenting them. So changes have to be documented and approved. That doesn't mean everything has to go through a CAB, doesn't mean everything has to go through a change manager. But if all the changes are documented, we understand how we went from one state to another, then we can make sure the information is correct for that.
Yeah. In this series or in this session today, we haven't really talked about the whole technology and the whole information side of things, and it's interesting that this becomes our first takeaway. What's the reason we're doing it? But traditionally, when we talk change and release management from IT, this is probably the first thing they would want to talk about is the whole technical side of change, and we've intentionally today discussed change from a service point of view, because that's where the gap is today. But definitely there's still that need from a technology point of view to capture the information and to do change from a technology point of view as well.
Yeah, no, it's essential. I mean, it's essential to understanding where we are and where we're going. Because I mean, one of the things is by doing change management is you can understand what is going to happen, not just being reactive to what has happened. So you know that a change is coming. I mean, I was alluding to going from Windows 7 to Windows 10. Well, if I know that it's coming, then I can make sure my applications are ready for it and so on, as opposed to, we've made the change to Windows 10, now what has broken? So
yeah, let's catch up, yeah.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Sue.
So I was just going to say, just a case study. We have, we have a client that was or is still running some Windows 7, I want to say, or Windows. It might even be some XP. It's something brutal. Something brutal.
Yeah, it
And
probably is XP.
oh, just brutal. And they're paying Microsoft a ton of money to support their stuff that's out of support because they don't have a choice. There's some stuff that's running on it that won't run on anything else. And so, as you were mentioning earlier, that consideration of what will the impact be, what else do we need to change, what else do we need to plan for is huge. And the financial implications, if you're not managing that proactively, can be significant.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So the next takeaway, and we've alluded to that too. I mean, certainly from our perspective, change management is a process that is internal to IT. Client needs, client requirements need to be taken into account, but they should be represented by business relationship management representatives. So it's an IT person that represents the clients, not the clients themselves sitting on the board, because they don't necessarily have a role to play directly in making decisions on change management, because change management ultimately is an IT decision, but it has to take into account client needs. And the last point is, again, we've alluded to it earlier, but it's important to stress. The release schedule must be published and agreed upon with the IT clients. Actually, it's usually part of an SLA to define when releases will occur, major and minor releases. And even in an SLA, you should have an agreement on how to handle emergency releases. How will the client be informed? So that releases, should never come as a surprise. It should never be that, oh, we can't do this weekend because IT has decided to make an update to this application. It should always be known ahead of time and agreed upon.
Okay. So terrific discussion today, and thanks everyone for joining our session. Our last webinar in this series is on August the 11th, and it is on the HR perspective. Long and short, technology doesn't run itself. People are and will always be critical to the process of being effective in IT. So we're going to talk about that on August the 11th. Feedback, welcome as always, info@rapaconsulting.com. If you have any ideas and things you'd like us to dig into, we'd be happy to do that. And also encourage you to take a look at RAPA Insight, our solution for helping you accelerate insight in terms of your service management data that you have today and being able to get more out of it. So Pierre, Richard, thank you very much for the session today, and have a good weekend, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
See you soon.
See ya.
Bye-bye.